Okay, I think we're live. Did you know that according to Gallup, a Gallup article, that only 22% of employees strongly agree that their performance review process is fair and transparent? Well, transparency is what builds trust, which is a critical step that is impacting your team culture. Now, and it won't ever exist until you start to recognize that the generational diversity on your team needs to be identified. You have to be aware of it. This is what is driving the culture and the communication within your team. Now, generational inclusion isn't about themed lunches or Slack trivia, right? And comparisons. It's about mutual respect. It is about driving a dialogue within your team. It is about empowering your team to have a voice at every single level, regardless of title, regardless of generation. Now, good day, everyone. I am Christina Green, your generational workforce translator, and I'm here to talk to you today about how to strengthen your team culture without waiting for HR to take the challenge or to take that charge. Now, what I want to make sure to say is that this is not a shade to HR in any way. This is about empowering leaders to ensure that you know how to take up arms to be able to start to take action, to start to take the true leadership position that you are intended to have within your team. HR is a strategic partner. They are to be a helpful hand in helping to cultivate culture, but we're going to talk about how culture is actually fostered within your own team. All right, now let's get into it. Here we go. Okay. So here's what the problem is, that we assume that HR is actually responsible for things greater than they are, right? So as I mentioned before, they are a support system. They are a helpful hand. They are a partner, but they do not own the culture within an organization, right? They can provide structure and policies and processes, even programs and initiatives. But it is the leaders who are to take the lead in this. They cannot help your teams, your people to feel seen, to feel respected or valued. That is fully owned by leaders, right? They can set the stage, but we essentially, as leaders, are the ones who have to perform the play, right? Now, we also to assume assume that HR is responsible for fixing any type of conflict that we have, any conflict that we have within our teams, conflicts that we may have with as leaders within our teams. That they're not responsible for that. They are a facilitator in that space. But if you're waiting for HR to step in, then that problem is going to escalate much faster than you ever could think, right? It is HR should be that resource when you need it and not the default conflict resolution manager. They're not there to manage that conflict. Leaders are the coaches, right? We are the facilitators of trust and not the referees waiting for a red card, if you will, right? Waiting for a card to be thrown on the field for it to be acknowledged that this is an issue. We have got to be able to sharpen our tools daily and how it is that we're cultivating this environment within the culture, within our team, within our organization. We also seem to think that HR is responsible for employee development. No, they can have these programs and initiatives that can help people to support their career trajectory and their development, but they are not responsible for developing our teams, for developing the individuals who are on our team. Leaders are the ones who drive that real-time growth and that feedback, right? So if you are relying on an annual process that is driven by HR, programs or maybe even checklists, this is going to kill your momentum. True leadership happens when leaders regularly coach, and that means we use the opportunities of the check-ins, of the team collaborations, these initiatives that are we're pursuing both individually as well as teams. We use this as an opportunity to stretch and support our people. We also wrongly assume that HR is solely responsible for the retention and the engagement of our people. of our teams. This is a miss. They're usually the ones who report on these metrics and therefore kind of become the messenger that gets shot down in this process. But they are not responsible for ensuring that our retention numbers, right? That we are keeping our good people and that we are moving those who need to continue to move and grow throughout their career. They're not responsible for it. They report on it, but they are not responsible for it. Employees stay or leave based on their manager, not HR. If they have a bad interaction with HR, typically they're not going to leave because of that reason. They are going to actually leave if they have a bad experience with their leader. And leaving can look like even moving within the organization, transferring into other departments under different functional leadership. So every survey shows people don't leave the companies, they leave bad managers. So we've got to do more to invest in ourselves as leaders. As organizations, we have to do better with investing into our leaders, both emerging and existing, to ensure that they have the tools to feel empowered in their roles as leaders within the organizations. So remember, HR is your strategic partner. They are not your crutch. They are not the fourth leg of your table or the third leg of your stool to keep you standing. They are a helpful addition to help you along your journey, but they are not intended to be the primary source for problem solving, conflict resolution, employee retention, creating your culture, developing your teams. They are a partner along your journey, right? Everyday culture, the everyday culture that your team feels and experiences, that is 100% based on the team culture, the experience that you are helping to cultivate on your team. Okay, so just a little bit about me. So why do I care so much about making sure that we've got a lens into generational dynamics within the workplace? Well, I've spent over 2 decades in leadership, primarily in healthcare, where the urgency and the hierarchy and burnout were often treated as normal, right? I've led teams and I've conducted these reviews. I've met with HR, I've met with other leaders across organizations, and I've sat through these meetings where culture was just a buzzword, right? And I followed that playbook because that was what was handed to me. And I believe that that is you just accept what is handed to you, that this is the way things are and things can never change. Well, as a Gen X leader, I never questioned it at first, but then and I bought into the grind and I adopted the corporate jargon, and that didn't help me or my teams, right? Is that mindset wasn't building a strong team, and it wasn't building me as a leader either. It was actually building walls and divisions and barriers between progress. And I watched talented people suffer in the process, right? They would either disengage, they will get overlooked for promotions or opportunities, and then I would see these teams start to dissolve, both under my leadership as well as within other teams. And this doesn't have to be the norm. Although it is very common, it doesn't have to be the norm that we accept as we move forward. And all of this was because we just didn't understand how to handle these situations. The humans in these positions, the humans that are being treated as pawns within this game, right? And start to treat them with the care that we all deserve. And I realized that culture just doesn't change because someone in HR writes a policy, right? You can have a policy, and those policies are to create structure. They are to protect the company and to protect leaders and to give everyone guidelines. But that culture doesn't live within that policy. That culture lives within each of the leaders who are leveraging it as some guardrails and boundaries to be able to navigate the space successfully. Now, today I get to help organizations build generationally intelligent teams that don't just perform, that people actually want to stick around, right? Because when people feel seen, when they feel valued, and when they feel respected, they start to rise. And so do all of the things that are around them, right? Both in their performance, the initiatives, performance of the organization, performance within the team, as well as you start developing your succession plan, your leadership pipeline, This is the greatest investment that you can make within your organization is to invest in your people. Now, I talk a lot about generational inclusion and what that is. Now, here's some ideas of what it isn't and what it is. It's certainly not token shout outs, right, during a team meeting where you are using vague language to just say, oh, everyone's doing a great job. No, that's not going to fly across any generation, right? It's not mandatory fun activities. Gone are the days where happy hours and lunchtime are supposed to be spent with your colleagues and your coworkers. Every generation views this differently. And a lot of it is influenced based on how we were raised and how we've experienced the corporate space, right? We've all survived COVID. And so that has also to change the way that we start to interact at work. So mandatory fun is never fun, right? All right. It's not, it is certainly not pretending that the differences that exist within our teams, within our organizations, that they don't exist. That there aren't differences between the levels of experience. There are not differences between the generations that we have and the different positions that they hold within your company. It's when we start to pretend that these things don't exist, that the way that, boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z might be approaching their work, that the differences in how they do that, as if they don't exist, as if they're not important, as if they have to do it one way or the other. That is honestly what's causing a lot of the miscommunications within almost every team, right? Every team that I get an opportunity to work with, to consult with, we find that communication is typically the biggest barrier. And part of it is because no one agrees on how to communicate and why. So you've heard me talk before about how, Gen Z don't ever call them on the phone because that's not how they like to communicate. And there's nothing wrong with that. Where boomers and Gen X will probably lean more heavily into picking up the phone or maybe sending a direct message or an email, right? The differences between these generations, it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It is just saying that it is different. And if you don't acknowledge those differences and start to adapt new methods for communicating, as an example, then that's where you're going to have the majority of your barriers. Okay. Now, here's what generational inclusion does look like. Just a few giving space for different communication styles, right? So you can have meetings, you can have emails, you can have direct messaging. I've even seen some teams use, Loom videos, right? Where they will record responses or someone through a process. Not everyone has to be available at the same time or everyone to be quote held hostage for an hour-long meeting where people can debate and ask questions, and we've seen these things go off the rails and we've seen them be very successful, right? So it's about choosing the communication styles that matter most to your team. So as a leader, facilitating this conversation. Now, here's what it also is. It's respecting the different career expectations and the motivations for everyone on your team. So what that looks like is millennials tend to want to move up the career ladder, right? Boomers, many of them have already achieved that, and many of them are moving into and have moved into retirement. So they've achieved the levels or the positions that they have been working towards most of their career. Gen X, in many ways, are in the process of moving into many of those positions, and some of them have already attained many executive positions. I think the number is about 35% of them. So, and then what is driving most of that? Some of it has to do with a sense of, work ethic. Perhaps maybe it's they're where they are in their career. And so perhaps maybe it's that they're continuing to move up the ladder. Millennials also too are adopting that. They didn't go to school to get all of these degrees to not to be in an entry level position. So they're continuing to work through the channels to work themselves up into leadership, right? Gen Z might feel a little different because they feel very connected to the work and the impact of the work that they're doing, and maybe the titles aren't necessarily what they're going after, or it could be, but the motivations behind it sometimes are related to responsibility, right? As Gen X, we many of us are parents to Gen Z, and we've incurred a series and amount of debt, and so we may have a greater sense of responsibility or obligation that drives much of our motivations for our career advancement. Just examples. Now, what it also is, it's normalizing the space, right? The questioning, the dialogue, the feedback that we're leveraging within our teams. So creating that open space to be able to share, to ask questions, to provide feedback. And this means even feedback up the chain, right? To say, listen, this was our approach and this did not work for us, right? Where we broke off into silos and we each owned a piece and they never connected, right? So being able to provide feedback into a space, into a safe space, is important, right? Being able to ask questions and to dialogue. And this means at multiple levels, not creating a hierarchy within your team. This is going to help you to be successful and leading your teams, but also to the driving performance improvement. So you've heard me say some examples across the generations, right? So boomers are very loyal, they value loyalty, and so they're looking for that long-term contributions, right? They're looking for that to be acknowledged and to be done so maybe more publicly. But remember, disclaimer, every individual, every person is different. Even though you have someone within a certain generation, does not mean that their preference is to be publicly recognized. Okay. So always ask first. Good leaders always ask first. All right. Gen X, they value autonomy. So show them trust and not micromanagement. Give them, demonstrate that you trust them by giving them the opportunity to lead and have that autonomy. Well, millennials, they value the development. So approach this from a coaching perspective, right? Lean in to provide them support but not micromanagement, to give them feedback and guidance, right? And tie that feedback and their performance to their career path. Remember, that's what's important to them is to continue to move and develop in a way that is meaningful to them. And then Gen Z, they value transparency. So share that why behind the decisions, right? Help them understand how it is that you're making decisions, how we make decisions as a team, as an organization, and how what they're doing is ultimately contributing to that bigger picture. Okay, so here's some ideas and how you can start to build trust within your team, right? This is a start. This is how you can start the conversation, get the ball rolling as a leader. So, one, the start, stop, continue conversations, right? So, in your one on ones or even in your team meetings, start asking the question and normalize this. Don't let this be the only time that you ask around performance review time, because so much gets lost in this season where we're so focused on checking off a box instead of taking care of the people who are actually part of this process, as well as taking care of the action items that come out, the feedback that comes out of this review process. Let this process be transparent. Let it be a feedback loop, right? Ask the question. So what's one thing we should start doing? We should stop doing, and we should continue doing more of to work better together, right? Now, this could be you one-on-one with your team, this or one-on-one with your someone on your team. This could be asking this more globally within a team meeting. You'll get different responses in different areas, but it is a valuable question to get their feedback. And to the level which they share with you is actually going to directly tell you what level of trust have you established with them. And if this is the first time you are in fact actually leaning in and doing this work, I would suggest that you gently move into this space. You may not get responses at first if your team does not feel safe, if they do not feel psychologically safe, that they can trust what you are saying, They can trust that this question does not actually have, a tail at the end that's going to bite them or hurt them. Okay. All right, next, consider some reverse mentoring moments or even opportunities. So, reverse mentoring is where typically in mentoring, we think that this is someone typically with a higher in a hierarchy, someone who has a more elevated position and title. And that person is typically someone who is in an elder generation over someone else. So, it's speaking to their experience, right? Now, reverse mentoring is recognizing that there is value across the team and being able to take what would be traditionally the mentor role and maybe positioning it into the position of someone who is typically the mentee, right? It's making sure that there is a cross exchange or a bi-directional exchange of information. So reverse mentoring to say, look at it from the different direction, right? So it's building that cross-generational respect organically. Now, you can foster this on your team without having anything formal. No formal program or initiative is necessary to be able to, and you can start to foster this actually openly in a team meeting by asking targeted questions to say, here's how we've always done it, right? And here are the reasons behind it, right? Providing the why. And then start to ask and say, how, if we were to look at this or re-examine this process or how we do this today based on what we know today. Think about the technology we now have access to that we didn't when we formed this process or this program, right? To look at it differently and then to ask those who may be newer on the team, those who may have a different perspective because you've heard them maybe one on one with you. They have shared other insights they may not have shared openly in a team environment. This is an opportunity to start to get past the mic to those who may not speak often, right? Get those insights. This is another way of building team rapport and creating that psychological safety. Do not allow anyone's voice to be dismissed or to be shushed if in any way within this space. Allow all ideas to come out, and essentially you all kind of come to what is agreeable. Now, ultimately, as a leader, you make the decision what those business decisions are, but you're creating a level of feedback and transparency. This helps people to feel part of the process. Okay, let me keep going. You also do want to acknowledge the wins frequently. So, and do so in the language that is meaningful to your team. So, generationally, you want to approach this, much like I was saying before, that recognition and how it should be tailored to your team. Boomers, loyalty to be acknowledged, right? The time that they have been with organizations, the time that they have been, developing their expertise. Gen X likes to demonstrate your trust that you have in them and their ability to lead and or to execute. Millennials, they highlight their growth, right? Their process and where they started and where they are today, right? And how they are continuing to move through that space. Now, this is not to say that all of these things could not work across the generations. Once again, check with your team, ask them how they like to be recognized, okay? And then Gen Z, maybe they like public shout outs. Not everybody does. We have introverts who would never want to be called out. We have even extroverts who may not want to be called out in different spaces. Okay. Always ask your team. Now, lastly, I would say, now to continue to build that trust on your team is to or, provide transparent feedback, right? And create that opportunity, create that space for them to be able to provide feedback to you as well as their leader. No one does this perfectly. No one is the best leader on the planet. Even some of the best leaders have had failure, or they've had moments where they have failed. And that's how they have become great leaders, is because they recognize those moments and they learn from them and they adopt differently and how they move forward. Okay. All right. Now, how can you start to shift that culture if you don't necessarily have the buy in of leadership? First, I want you to stop believing the myth that I can't change anything unless leadership approves it. No. right? Yeah, you probably cannot adopt or spend money on programs, initiatives, and consulting and bringing in tools and doing all of that without leadership approval, right? But what you can do is you can start to adopt these little micro moments that you are being intentional within your team, right? So because culture is a million different small moments, right? It is not one massive initiative. It is not something that turns around overnight, right? There's a beautiful quote, and I cannot remember who it's from. Um, I'll have to put her name in the comments, but she said, to quote her, "Big ships turn slow." Right? So, meaning the larger the initiative you have going on, the larger your team, the larger the organization that you are, you're gonna turn it in order to have that change, it's going to be a slow incremental process. But every, steering in the right direction is every leader being intentional with how it is that you're trying to foster this environment on your team. Okay. So leaders on the ground are who what shape, excuse me, leaders on the ground, they shape how policies actually feel. So the policies that HR may establish for you, the guidelines, the boundaries in which you are to work within in your organization, they establish that structure, but leaders are the ones who absolutely facilitate that on a daily basis, right? So think about this. Just some small shifts is normalize this open dialogue without needing any type of formal approval, right? Model that respect that you are expecting within your team, that respect and inclusion for every person, not these micro behaviors, right? Of microaggression. It's really the micro behaviors of intentional movement, right? Of being intentional with every individual as well as with your team. It's set the emotional tone that you want to see ripple outward. So within your team as well as outwardly. I would say other leaders influence other leaders, right? So do your part as a leader to stay connected to other leaders within your organization. Use that as an opportunity to start to set the tone. This is how you can start to drive culture change based on those who you're interacting with, right? Be accountable to your fellow leaders and how it is that you all show up together, and how your teams and model how your teams are to work with one another cross functionally. And then influence from where you stand, right? HR can amplify based on initiatives and programs and have resources, but they're not necessarily the initiators, right? They're not the ones who are going to implement all of these things. You are pulled in as leaders in order to drive this change. So be the influence, be the change, as Gandhi says, right? Be the change you want to see in the world, in your organization, on your team. All right. You are culture's first draft. You are not its editor. All right. Now, lastly, I want you to start to think about, because we've talked about a lot of different things. I've shared many different tactics and how you can start to implement this today. But I want you to think of what is one thing that you can shift in your next conversation, maybe your next meeting, maybe your next feedback that you're going to be delivering or requesting. What is one thing that you can shift in the next week, in the next month, that's going to help you to show up more intentional as a leader? That's the question I will leave you with. Yeah, but remember, strengthening culture does not require a bigger budget or a bigger title. It just requires a bigger commitment. All right, as I shift screens here. All right, so if you're ready for a leadership reset, right? I have a free online or email course actually that you can sign up for. These are daily strategies delivered over 30 days to help you connect, retain, and inspire across your multi-generational teams. This will come directly to your inbox so you can um, help you to build a culture that is rooted in trust, to turn your feedback into fuel for growth, inspire ownership at every level instead of dismissing them, to transform your conflict into collaboration. Now, if you're interested in this course, this is absolutely free. Just use the QR code that's on the screen and go ahead and sign up, and you will get your first email immediately. And excuse me, this is 30 days to learn my best strategies and tools for retaining your top talent across a multi-generational team. Because believe me, this is not easy. We need tools. These are things that we have not, we have either conformed to the way it's always been done. And so this is the hand-me-down leadership that we have received. We could have some of the best leadership development programs within our organizations, and yet still fall short of serving and supporting our teams. Now, how do you do that? Sign up for the course, start learning and pulling some tools. Now, will you implement every single one of them? No. This is intended to start to give you a repository to identify where you've got the greatest opportunities and how you might be able to be more intentional in how you're showing up with your teams. All right. Okay, so now shifting gears slightly, we've always got something going on, and I'm so incredibly excited to share this with you because next week I'm going to be joining forces with a dear friend of mine and fellow coach, Nicole Gray, and we're going to start having bold conversations about confidence in the workplace and even in entrepreneurship. Right? We're going to have a great lineup of guests who have all been there. They've all been there with struggling with confidence, and they have insights that you are definitely not going to want to miss, because confidence, if you've heard me say this before, this is a choice, and it's not always the easy choice, but it is absolutely a choice. So next week we're going to kick off this week long, this 5-day series where we are having these dynamic conversations with these awesome guests. And there's a QR code on the screen if you want to catch us on YouTube. We also too will be streaming live on LinkedIn, but if you use this QR code, you can set up some notifications about each of these events, and we'll be going live at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. 12 p.m. Eastern. But all the details are there, and you can also just see my LinkedIn live events to learn more details there. All right. And then, of course, I always have my monthly themes for the weekly lives we do on Wednesdays here. And next month is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we want to be able to dive into how this is actually showing up and impacting us in the workplace, especially across the generations. We know that mental health and talking about it in the workplace has started to become a bit more popular. But not every generation is open and receptive to this new popularity, or how it is that we are approaching this topic in the workplace. And so I want to start having a conversation around what this looks like for us in the workplace. How can we make sure, as leaders, how can we make sure to create the psychological safety for our teams without being their therapists? How can we start to support some of our teams and prevent them from burning out? How can we really build and foster a healthier workplace, and start to address and stop ignoring mental health in the workplace? And so I'll be here live every Wednesday where we're going to be diving into these conversations. The QR code here will take you to past streamings of other live streams we've had here, as well as we'll start once I go live, you will be able to access all of the replays for each of these events. So this is our topics for May. So definitely looking forward to it. So join us as you can. All right. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your attention today. I am Christina Green, your generational translator in the workforce. And once again, if you're interested in that free email course, there is the QR code to subscribe. And in the meantime, you take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Take care.